remember the first time I remember Cramer, it was Mr. Cramer's town. I was just riding with Mother and Daddy, and Daddy said, we're going through Mr. Cramer's town. And it was hard surface road from New Hope Road through Cramerton, which was a good ride. We were as a T-model Ford, and went by the schoolhouse, and my mother said, well, what are they going to do about the name of the school? Daddy said, well, right now it's Maysworth School. So Mr. Cramer might change it, but this is his town now. I don't remember when that was. I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old, but it is sticking in my mind. It was Mr. Cramer's town.
There were a lot of the older people that I grew to know and to like real well. A lot of them had stories about working in Cramerton at the mill company. A lot of the older men had worked for Mr. Cramer on his farm, especially a lot of the older men in the Baltimore community. One of the guys that I worked with, his name was John Cramer Neely, and his daddy was the field manager for Mr. Cramer. He rode a big horse, wore the big tall riding boots. He worked for Mr. Cramer. And when John was born, Mr. Cramer told John's daddy, said, if you'll let me name your son, said I will keep him in overalls and brogans until he starts school. So when Mr. Cramer named him after himself, being Cramer being John's middle name, John Cramer Neely. And he always thought that was a high spot for him because he had a middle name of the town founder, which I thought was very interesting. He told that story several times.
And the good news is Mr. Cramer paid out, invested back in his community. He believed the greatest asset was his employees, not his equipment. And that's always carried out with me in the work ethic. But that's who America was. And it was a can-do attitude.
Stuart, I think it was Stuart, married Terry Moore, the actress, and of course she was here. And they had the boat landing down almost where that, just a little further in, toward the mountain from where the new art is on the mountain. And you'd come by and their boat would be parked there. Yeah.
And Mr. Cramer lived in the last house, and he had, the house is still there. The last I heard, it's still there. And he had maids that worked for the place. He had a swimming pool. He had a chauffeur. Mr. Tom Kelly was the chauffeur for the Cramers back then. And like I said, he hired these people from around Baltimore, Cramer, to do the work to run the farm. But my grandfather was the overseer. And once Mr. Cramer died, he left his widower there, Miss Cramer, and she would come down some Saturdays and get out of her car and sit up on the porch and talk with my grandfather for hours. That was her friend.
I can vaguely remember seeing him, maybe Mr. Cramer, in the drugstore down at town, Cramerton, across from the depot, but I don't ever remember talking specifically with him. Now I did, Mrs. Cramer used to live up on the mountain. I remember, shouldn't say this, but she called my dad down there. He was a notary public, and she wanted a paper to notarize, and he told her he'd do it. She said, how much is it? He said, 50 cents. And she said, well, if I bring several, will you give me a discount?
And so he bought out Mr. Mays, Mr. Dodsworth, and he came here and built the second mill, the Mayflower, and increased the town and did all the things he'd wanted to do for the town and the mill operation building churches and schools and golf courses and health facilities, gyms, and all manner of things, and made sure that the housing was good. It was all electrified, and the houses were high quality and comfortable, and did all the things. So that is how he came to be here. It was a lifelong desire of his to, as he put it, make the textile industry come to its full potential as a wonderful industry that did not only produced fine products, but was good for all the people who lived and worked in mill towns.
Well, my great grandfather Reese, the stories that I know was he was really close to Mr. Cramer, and really knew him very well. As a matter of fact, what happened was Mr. Cramer would write out the name. He would spell my grandfather's name R-E-E-S-E. And he spelled the real Reese name R-E-E-C-E. But my great-grandfather didn't have the heart to tell Mr. Cramer he'd misspelled his name. So we ended up the same family with one with an S and one with a C. That's a true story. And that's why it happened that way. My grandfather would not tell Mr. Cramer he'd made a mistake.
Miss Cramer would come sometimes to, I'd see her at the bank, and she was always very polite, very nice, and she would give us a nickel or dime apiece. She would go in the bank and we would speak to her, and when she'd come out, she'd always give us some change. And she was just so nice. I never knew any of the Cramers except Miss Cramer. And she would have a chauffeur and would occasionally come downtown. It was always to the bank, and that's where I would see her.
I was about 10 years old. We would get notices. I don't remember how we got the information that they had a lot of parties up on the mountain and that they lived there part-time. And one time, it's when one of the Cramers, I think, had married Terry Moore, we got the message that they were going to be coming under the underpass in a limousine with all of them. So the Old Town crowd, we were just so excited. And so we went out there and stood at the rails and watched them come under the underpass in their black limo with all their tucks, and there was a pretty woman in the car. So that was just a highlight for us.
As I worked with the town, I noticed there was a document, a paper that three Davidson College students prepared for some sort of a project they were doing, whereby they, similar to this, interviewed a lot of the mill workers and stuff around town. And the conclusion that they came to was that Mr. Cramer, in developing the mills, obviously was for a profit motive, but he provided for his workers' education, funded that real well. He saw that they had ample churches and built several of those. He was instrumental in doing that. And I think that made Cramerton a little more perhaps unique than what you might have seen in some of the other towns around.
Well, I always loved the stories that Dad told me of when their close family friend of his older brothers, George Patton, the famous general from World War II, used to visit. And he was quite a character. And Dad used to enjoy riding and hunting and just learning all kinds of stories. Dad was military, grandfather was Navy, and Stuart Jr. was Army. So there was a lot of things, and it was, I always loved those stories, and that was a lot of fun. And then Dad would talk to about a lot of the things that Dad was a pilot, as am I, and Dad had up where the middle school is, he built an airstrip, and he used to, when he was stationed in Washington, D.C. at the War Department there before the war, he had a very fine biplane aircraft with a cabin biplane, not an open one, and he used to fly twice a week up and down from Washington to Cramerton.
We never wanted for anything, and I had a real good girlfriend that I grew up with, Jane Long. Her dad was electrician for the town. And poor Miss Cramer, she was up there in the mansion, and if a socket didn't work, she'd call Mr. Long to come up there. Everything broke.
And he'd take me and Jane with him. And we got to go in the mansion, and her brother had all these animals that he had killed in Africa. Had them all stuffed in that room. And we didn't know what to do. It was wonderful. And they had a pool, and she always said, now girls, you cannot go in the pool. I will not let you go in that pool. But you can go in that room and enjoy those animals, and that's what we did.
Oh yeah, like I said, we wasn't supposed to be up on the mountain, up around the house. Miss Cramer was one of the nicest ladies. She'd invite us in, y'all need some water, fill up our canteens. Just real nice.
At some point, Stuart Cramer purchased the entire town, and he made a commitment. He wanted to see a church, and that church was at that point located in really the center of the town, and you could look right down the street and see the mill, I guess that's the Mayflower Mill, and people would walk to church, people would walk to work. So that building was built, the sanctuary was built in 1920, and Stuart Cramer helped design that. It's a beautiful building, and the layout is sort of in a fan shape, which was progressive, because most churches were in an old Southern Baptist architecture back. But this was a great place to preach. It was the people in the back were not that far away from you.
Back during the Great Depression, my grandfather bought some land. Had bought some land. I don't know exactly how many acres of land he bought, but it must have been, I don't know, like 50, 60 acres of land that he owned. Where you come into Baltimore, Cramerton, to your left, that's where I was telling you previously, that's where I was born. My grandfather owned that property there all the way to the top of the mountain. That was his property. And back during the Great Depression, our grandmother passed before his family was raised. And so the only way that he could raise his children, he felt like he sold the land that he had to Mr. Cramer. He sold that land to him. I think they told me, this come from my family, that he sold that land for 50 cents an acre back then. And he did that in order to raise his children. And Mr. Cramer and my grandfather had an agreement that if he bought the land from my grandfather, that he would build him a house, the one that I was born in, and he could live there until he died.
Mr. Cramer's idea or concept of building a town that was self-contained and where they had everything, we didn't lack for anything. Most of us, well, everybody, when I first remember about Cramerton, everybody that lived here either owned a business or worked in the mill. And that's the only way you got a house, because Mr. Cramer owned all the houses.
But so this house here was actually technically the summer home, but after my grandfather died in 1940, unfortunately and sadly, the home in Charlotte burned through an accident. And my grandmother moved out here and lived the remainder of her life here, and she invited her brother, a retired congressman who'd had served in Congress for 28 years without ever losing an election, George Holden Tinkham, a congressman from the Back Bay in Boston. He came down here and he brought all of his, he was a big game hunter, and he brought all of his artifacts and from his career there and in Congress down into Maymont. So it was a wonderful place, and Dad always enjoyed living there, and all family members found it as a locus for family reunions and family occasions.
So I guess in, 2013, the home had gone into foreclosure and stuff and been sitting there. And since we lived in the neighborhood, we'd walked up there several times and looked at it and said if it ever came for sale, it would be something we'd be interested in purchasing. And so in 2013, it went on the market and we were able to purchase it and stuff.
Once we moved into it, we started finding out about it. And the interesting thing that was really cool was that's about the same time, well, we bought it, we did some repairs to it, and then when we moved into it, it was about the same time Stuart Cramer High School was opening and all that. So when the school opened, the Cramers were coming to town, and we got to have the whole family at that point into our home. And that was really nice, and we got to learn a lot about the history at that point.
As far as the house goes,
It was Mr. Cramer's summer home. He had a nice home in Charlotte, and this was his summer home.
So it's not built, it's not built for a formal entertaining, I guess. It's built more for your vacation and stuff. It's pretty interesting, some of the things that are still in it. You've got cowbells that are still in it. It was one of the first houses to be electrified in North Carolina, and we've preserved the main box that still has the levers that you can flip up. So from that standpoint, every electrician that comes in are just in awe of that and amazed to see that.
And then we would have Easter sunrise service up on the mountain at the Cramer's house. They had an outside theater area, and we'd go up there and have services up there, and then they would serve us coffee and juice and donuts.
We knew about Cramer Mountain, and this is before the development was built, but I can remember my grandmother took us up several times to the mansion on the top of the hill where the Cramer family lived. At that time, Mrs. Cramer, the widow, was living there, and we met her. We met several times, but my grandmother was a good friend of hers, and she would often invite my grandmother up for tea. And to me, that mansion was almost like the Biltmore house. I mean, and so. But again, that's just part of the beauty and the charm of Cramerton. Still is.
My father built the third house in Lakewood in 1949-50, and wanted to be near golf because he had a passion for golf. He caddied for some of the Cramers on the 1927 golf course. So that's how he had money. My grandmother used to say, the kids all ask for a dime and 10 cents with 15 cents all the time. She said, Alfred never asked me for any money. And she didn't know that he was going up on the mountain and caddying. He would have been, well, I have a picture of him when he was 14, which was in 1933, and he was caddying.
Miss Cramer was the sweetest woman, and she would always go to the orchard up there and get fruit and bring it downtown there on Center Street and give it away to anybody that wanted fruit. And Mr. Cramer was so good about helping the people in Cramerton. And most people had 2, 3, and 4 children. They couldn't afford milk. And he would give them milk out of his dairy. That's what he did. If they needed the milk, all they had to do was go get the milk. And he it was just a wonderful place to live.
Probably where the Cramer family would deliver milk quarts. Depends on the size of your family, what size milk you would get each day. If you had 4, I think they get about a half a gallon or something.
And Miss Tate was also one that did the ironing for the Cramers. So we would see Miss Cramer come in a lot of times to pick up her laundry. I vaguely remember when Miss Cramer would come to visit, to pick up her laundry, because at that time I was probably, I'm going to say maybe 9 in that area, 8 or 9 years old. But I do remember her coming in for her laundry. No, I just remember the car coming in. And in fact, now, it's my understanding that's the way, why we had the road paved there, because it was a dirt road. And the story is that when Miss Cramer came to pick up her laundry, and it had either snowed or the road was so messy that the car got stuck on the street. And Miss Cramer said, "Go over there and pave that road." And that's another tale from growing up in the town of Cramerton.
Talked about the Cramer family. Oh, well, it was high respect for them. It just, I never heard anything negative said about them, and I do know that there was a lot of appreciation for the Cramer family because they provided jobs for the people. And going back to Oscar Norris, who was blind at that time, Oscar spoke really highly of the Cramer family and his family and the things they did.
Well, I think what makes Cramerton unique is the first thing that comes to my mind is the Cramers and how the story of how Mr. Cramer got here and he decided to build this town and the mill and all his accomplishments, and that's just a very interesting thing, and I think that is what really made this town.
Mr. Cramer had an influence with the people to have the train come through Cramerton. I don't think it originally was going to come through Cramerton, but Mr. Cramer had enough influence to have the plans to have the train come by Cramerton to take care of the manufacturing that was done in Cramerton.
And I say, Mr. Cramer designed his model mill village. He had sidewalks, and all the houses had indoor plumbing and hot water heaters, which was really special at that time.
I think it's because of the people that were in it, and the Cramers were so good to the people and for the people, And it was just, you hear other people talk about growing up, and we had the perfect growing up story.
The one thing that shocked me over the years is the fact that we have a river running through our town, but so few structures are actually impacted when we have floods. You would expect a town built right on the banks of the river to have many, many more structures, and that's not to say we don't have a few. The fire department, Cramerton Drug, we have some that get touched by the floodwaters, but it really goes back to Mr. Cramer's planning for Cramerton, because the floodplain has changed so much over the last 100 years, and so to have that foresight to set the structures back as far as he did back then has really helped us now.
We were very fortunate in Cramerton. Mr. Cramer provided everything for us. He provided a school. He provided 2 churches. He provided recreation centers, ball fields, pools, gymnasium. we had anything we needed, and we assumed everybody else did, but they didn't. We were special. Mr. Cramer made us special.
He envisioned that town, and so he built Old Town first. They was right across from the old mill, and then he built the new mill, and then he built Newtown, and then the other side, came later. But decided he wanted us to be central, so having a gym and having tennis courts and a football field. And I think in 1942, I believe the Army Corps of Engineers or somebody came in and they built where our stone steps and stadium are there by the baseball field. And so we were really blessed. And we had 2 golf courses. The first golf course was down by the South Fork River, down below where Stuart W. Cramer's home was up on the top.
My grandmother would see the Cramers in and around town, and memories of them were that they were good people, they were generous people. They shared things from their home, where Cramer Mountain, because they had a dairy. They had an orchard there. They had people that tended to those things, and so they would share. They would share butter, and cream.
Actually, my mother told me in the 50s that Stuart Cramer III, with his wife Terry Moore, the actress from Hollywood, came in a black limousine, and we all gathered at the underpass because he cut through there to go to his dad's house at Maymont, or his granddad.
But it all revolves back to my parents and grandparents, and who knew Mr. Cramer and Mr. Cramer Jr. and George, and all, or a great many of them, worked for them, and they knew them as their employer and people, but they were not somebody who would they could go up and talk to them like this, just like I'm talking to you.
One thing, a comment I would make about school was that the teachers were above par, from what I understand, for the area, because our salaries were supplemented by Mr. Cramer.
When I think of Cramerton, I think of Mr. Stuart W. Cramer. Very familiar with the family, the history, his face in some of the black and white photos. And I think of the innovation that our town has really provided the world, things that have perpetually and into the future have made a difference. The mill town, the textile innovations with khaki as a material that really changed the tide of the war, was a contributor to the United States and our allies winning WW2. The invention that is my favorite is air conditioning. The South would not have, we would not have seen the migration from the North to the South if it really weren't for air conditioning. That's why the South was not very populated. It's hot, and air conditioning totally changed that game.
But there's other people that I had talked to that had worked for Mr. Cramer, and they said what a great man he was. He took care of them very well, and it's just stories like this that kind of gets put on the back burner, and through history they get lost.
Well, I would just say that this town is just one of the best towns that there is in North Carolina. Like I said so many times, I think before, the fond memories of the people of the town. It was, and Mr. Cramer made it to where it was just so desirable to live here in this town. And I think people did move here a lot to come to work for the textile mills and that sort of thing. But because of the livelihood that he provided and the things that Mr. Cramer kind of put in place, people were attracted to the town, and they came here to live and to work, to just enjoy the small town of Cramerton.